Henry Paul left, and and to me, Adrian Lamb fits that bill. But thanks, Matthew. What did Barney have to say, Sarah?
Barney, who is at Baton Hall Blue. Sean Edwards and Andy Gregory, what a partnership. Was fortunate to watch them week in, week out. My granddad Bert always told me Alex Murphy was the best there ever was in either Kurd. Ellery Hanley, half-back or loose forward, was a great standoff half. I always think of him as a loose forward.
Yeah, definitely Hanley to me as a Wigan fan is a loose forward, but I know he played quite a bit internationally at standoff, and certainly in Australia he was a centre or a standoff predominantly when he played in Australia for the Tigers and for West. So I guess Hanley's one we'll talk about when we talk about loose forwards, isn't he? But Alex Murphy is a name that will always be brought up in these conversations because he's one of those people that is put into statues, put on Hall of Fame lists, all that sort of stuff. So we definitely can't talk about greatest halfbacks that either a 6 or a 7. We're not really distinguishing here between the 6 and the 7s too much. Alex Murphy's in that conversation for certain, and one of the best St Helens ever had on the field, and then kind of became synonymous with both coaching and the commentary box after those days.
And is the size of his mouth, yeah, and the controversial statement. Just rock everything. He's like, yeah, we get it. Shut up.
It seems like that colour commentator guy in rugby league has to be someone who was revered as a player and then rejected as a mouthpiece. It just seems like the natural progression there. And at Truth Talking Mav said, only 2 Saints players in this poll: Fiasco, Tommy Martin, Johnny Lomax, ? Bobby Goulding, ? So, just to be clear, Truth Talking Mav, it wasn't a poll. And it also wasn't a guessing game, but Tommy Martin, Johnny Lomax and Bobby Goulding have all definitely been covered in the conversation that we've had. So we'll talk about our other favourites now, if that's all right. Sort of go through some of those. But before I put the floor over to you guys, and we'll start with you, Tim, because it sounds like you've got a list, and also sounds like you've drawn up a list of 5 as well, Karsten. I want to raise a few names from the deep past, okay? And one of them is Albert Rosenfeld. So Albert Rosenfeld played in that sort of... I think he played in that famous Huddersfield side of the pre-war era, pre-First World War. But he's in the English Hall of Fame, the Australian Hall of Fame, and the International Hall of Fame. So certainly a guy who did it across the world in the game of rugby league. Another one that played a lot in internationally and is in the halls of fame is Jonty Parkin. Then you've got people like, if you look back into the days of old, you've got Dally Messenger, obviously, who came over with the All Goals touring side and has an award named after him for best player of the season. So he's certainly a player who needs to be mentioned in that sort of conversation as well, of these sort of legends from the past that we've obviously never had an opportunity to see play. So I thought it'd be only right if we could talk about some of these absolute legends when we're talking about this list. We've talked about some of them already as well with the likes of Millwood and people like that, and Alex Murphy, but I thought fair to mention a few others in that. But Tim, do you want to give us your list?
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about a few of them. So we've talked about Mickey Dobson, we've talked about Joey Johns, we've talked about Roger Millwood. Sean Long for me is just from a Great Britain and international perspective. That test against the Australians that he just dominated, and all those, that question mark of what would have happened if he had stayed and not left the tour and all that. But for me, he was someone who he was around that time that I was really getting into the sport, and he just was everything you'd want in a halfback. That ability to cut open and see something, and just a quality. You just couldn't catch him. That you just didn't know what he was going to do, and I don't think a lot of the time he knew either. So yeah, he was someone that I sort of really got into quite early on. And the other one, of course, how have we not mentioned Stanley Jean?
I mean, I think of Stanley Jean again probably as a forward.
What?
Really? Well, just because of the shape of him.
And I feel like later on in his days, he sort of was more a bench player that kind of came on to change a game rather than being like your halfback. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean,
yeah, I think certainly halfway is where I sit. Stood behind the bay, but able to just do things other people couldn't, and just be that again. Have that element of just being able to cut through when, especially when we got into the era where things were starting to get more robotic. He did have that ability to slice things open, and yet sometimes it was in the later sort of stages. It was from the bench, but yeah, I mean, it's just someone who I can't help but love.
Have you read his autobiography?
Oh yes, yeah.
Everyone must read his autobiography. It is the funniest thing ever.
I haven't read it actually. It was something that was recommended some time ago on the show, I think. So
probably by me, I think.
Yeah, so I think could have been. Yeah,
try and get
could have been me as well. Yeah,
it is hilarious.
And Sean Long's autobiography is another good one as well.
Yeah.
The permanently curious Sean Long. From the permanently curious Sean Long to Karsten. Who else was on your list then outside? Because you mentioned JT would be in your top 5. Joey Johns was another you mentioned. But who else? And who of the current players do you sort of see up there as the top right now?
From not top, it's Cooper Cronk, definitely. It's Benji Marshall. And this effing flick pass in the grand final.
But that was one of those cometh the hour, cometh the man moments, wasn't it? Where a player took over a game with a phenomenal piece of skill.
But he majored in the last 2 years, I think. What he was playing before the lockdown was amazing. Even last year. And I think
do you think there's a comparison with Benji Marshall and Danny Maguire in a way? In that, at the start of their careers, they were a different type of player, maybe a bit more of a running threat, a bit more of a pop up in these exciting moments kind of player, whereas they actually became a player who could run a game by the end of their careers, and Benji Marshall's still doing that now.
Yeah, probably. They were exciting and not much thinking. More an instinct player.
Yeah.
And now it's more the strategic controlling half.
No, definitely. It's certainly a player that deserves to be in the conversation. That's for certain. What about the sort of new crop? Because obviously the Australian greats are gone, aren't they now, in a way, and they're moving on to some others. And Tim might want to chip in with one in particular, I suppose.
Munster and Keary.
Munster and Keary for you are the best right now in Australia.
Yeah.
Any addition to that, Tim?
Well, I think DC has got what it takes to be in that conversation in a few. But I have frustrations with him and some of his, and I think when he's had opportunities, particularly when coming into the Origin side or for Australia, he hasn't quite got there yet. So I think he's one. If we do this conversation in 5 years, it might be different. But I'm going to hold off on that, taking that bait.
Fair enough. Keary's a player that I think is absolutely brilliant. I'm glad you mentioned Keary, Karsten. What about the best you think in Super League right now for you, Karsten? And do you think there's anyone in the conversation? Like with the NRL players, do you think any of the Super League players kind of come close?
It's hard to say. I think Prof, on his good day, can be one of the best halves in the game. Yeah. But on the other hand, he is so loose.
Yeah, on his good day, he can be a fantastic half. On a bad day, he can get sent off and be a liability.
And the same counts for Jake Connor. On a good day, he can beat the best of the world as 5'8". But on a bad day, he is so bad. I would say with Aiden Caesar, you see a top half in Huddersfield. He controlled Canberra to the grand final last season. That was definitely. But from the young Super League players, I don't see enough. That's my problem.
What?
They buy. The English clubs always buy Australian halfbacks.
Yeah, there is a lot of them about, although...
I see Truman and Richardson.
Yeah, Truman and Richardson are both young and both promising, aren't they, as a partnership potential? There's a potential there. It's kind of like what Tim said, come back in 5 years.
Yes, yeah. You don't know after what 5 games. Who knows? I think they have talent. Truman clearly showed it in the last 2 years, but he also has the games where he's just missing.
Yeah, I mean, at 21-year-old, you'd expect that, wouldn't you? Sarah, do you think there's anyone? Do you think there's anyone we've missed, Sarah, or is there anyone that you know, any particular special favourites you've got from your days of watching?
Gary Lester, he was a favourite. He played for us in '96 and '97, obviously when we got the promotion, and probably into '98. I don't know about '99, but yeah, he was an Australian, but led the team. He was an off half. He scored some nice tries. Other than that, I mean, Danny Brough, I think we were wrong to get rid of him when we did. The Horn, Cook, Brough triangle at 6, 7, and 13 had the potential to carry on being something very, very special, I think. But that was down to management issues at the club, I think, largely, that he went. But again, he's one of those that has got the ability, but it's his temperament, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Do you know, we talked about Ellery Hanley loose forward rather than halfback. There's another player I think we need to talk about in that conversation, and I would always categorise this guy, no matter what number he might have worn throughout his career, as more of a half than a forward, and it's Kevin Sinfield.
No. He's forward every day.
I see him way more as a half, and I actually think he probably played more games in his career overall in the halves. I think it was close. I actually checked this out once upon a time last year when I was having this discussion with someone, but I mean, because the thing that stands out for me for Sinfield was always his kicking game and his sort of control and leadership. So, you know, we've talked a lot about those skills for halfbacks, and he played more than half of his career, I think, in the halves for me, Sinfield. I'd say Sinfield should be in this conversation, although he should be secondary to Maguire, who was the best halfback that played for Leeds in.
Do you know something that's really interesting there, thinking about it? You know, we talked about Maguire and Burrows, but they were together from being under 10s. I mean, that's got to have such a huge impact. Like, they must have known each other's games down, like, to such fine details, which must really, really help when you know a player that well and you've played together for that long. You know, it's no surprise that they were such a pertinent partnership. Like, because I think that they were both very talented players, but I think almost the sum of them together was greater than two excellent players. Do you know what I mean?
And they were two players who, you talked about players who've had to play behind sort of beaten packs at the time. I felt like so much of their career wasn't behind beaten packs, that they were able to jump out there on the pitch and play to what they could see and do and show off their own talents, which was a lot of the time speed and elusiveness as much as anything else. Although both showed other skills, didn't they, in big moments in their careers. Both, you know, played key roles in grand final wins or Challenge Cup final wins.
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, Maguire's talent was for perching tries, basically. He was on the end of everything, wasn't he? And I think that's how he sort of really came to the front, was with his try scoring.
It was that support running, wasn't it? It was the support running line that he was just able to pick up so much off the back of.
Yeah, but that then takes the pressure off the rest of his game, because people are all talking about the fact that he's a great player